The man moved into an abandoned cabin in the forest until the day he heard something underground. Nathan Miller adjusted the baby better in his arms as he looked at the old wooden cabin in front of him. Tears still burned his eyes when he thought about how he had reached that point. 3 months ago, he owned a small woodworking shop in rural Pennsylvania, with a simple but dignified life. Today he was there, without a cent in his pocket, carrying little Ethan, his nephew of just 6 months who had been orphaned when his sister passed away due to childbirth complications. On the first night he managed to sleep after weeks of tension, Nathan woke up startled. It was a strange sound coming from under the cabin floor. A muffled cry, as if someone were trapped somewhere underground. Ethan also seemed restless, moving in the makeshift crib made with a drawer and some old blankets. Nathan lit the kerosene lamp he had found in the cabin and began walking through the small space, trying to locate where that disturbing sound was coming from. The noise seemed to come from different points on the wooden floor, as if there was something beneath the entire structure. His footsteps made the floorboards creak, but even so he could clearly hear those low, constant moans. He spent the entire night awake, holding Ethan against his chest, both restless. When the sun rose among the trees of the dense forest surrounding the property, Nathan gathered courage to investigate further. He left the cabin and walked around it, looking for some entrance or opening that could explain the sounds. That's when he found a small metal grate half hidden among the wild plants that had grown during the years of abandonment. He cleared the vegetation and discovered that the grate covered an opening that appeared to be a ventilation system. He put his ear close and clearly heard the same sound from the previous night. It wasn't human crying, he realized then. It was the wind passing through pipes and connections of an old system, creating that ghostly melody that had frightened him so much. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Still intrigued by the discovery, Nathan returned inside the cabin with Ethan. That's when he heard footsteps outside. His heart raced. Could it be one of the creditors who had found him even in that remote place? He picked up the baby and went to the small window, carefully moving aside the makeshift curtain. It was an elderly lady with white hair, appearing to be about 70 years old, carrying a basket in her hands. She wore a simple printed dress and a wool cardigan, despite the late morning heat. Nathan hesitated before opening the door. He didn't know anyone in that area and didn't know if he could trust her. The woman knocked gently on the door and spoke in a soft voice. "Good morning, dear. I'm Mrs. Dorothy. I live in the yellow house just up ahead. I saw smoke coming from the chimney last night and knew that someone had finally returned to old Stanley's house." Nathan opened the door slowly, still wary. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Nathan. Mr. Stanley was my grandfather." "Oh, my goodness," exclaimed Mrs. Dorothy, her eyes lighting up. "You're Stanley's grandson. He talked so much about the grandchildren he never met. And this little baby here." "He's my nephew, Ethan. We're going through a difficult time." Dorothy noticed the hesitation in Nathan's voice and the way he held the baby, as if it were all he had left in the world. "I brought fresh milk and some bread. I thought you might need it," she said, extending the basket. "May I come in? It's been so long since I've seen the inside of this house." Nathan allowed her to enter. Dorothy looked around nostalgically, gently touching the dust-covered furniture. "Your grandfather was a very good man, you know. After your grandmother passed, he closed himself off here, but he always helped those in need in the community. This cabin holds many beautiful memories. Did you know him well?" "Yes, I did. Stanley built something very special here. Have you discovered the underground shelter yet?" Nathan widened his eyes. "Underground shelter?" Dorothy smiled, noticing the young man's surprise. "Oh, so you don't know yet? Come, I'll show you." She led him to the back of the cabin, where there was a small structure that looked like a tool shed. At the back of this space, Dorothy moved aside some loose boards, revealing a staircase that descended underground. "Your grandfather built this in the 80s, when the region was going through very tough times. It was a safe place where families could take shelter when needed." Nathan carefully descended the wooden steps, holding Ethan. The shelter was larger than he had imagined. There was a space of about 20 square meters with natural ventilation through pipes connected to different points on the surface. It was exactly this system that was causing the strange sounds. "So that's why I heard those noises at night," murmured Nathan, finally understanding. "The wind passes through the pipes and creates those sounds. Your grandfather used to say it was as if the earth were breathing," explained Dorothy with a nostalgic smile. In the shelter, there were some shelves with expired supplies, old blankets, and a small table where Nathan noticed some yellowed papers. Dorothy noticed his interest. "Stanley always kept everything organized here. He said you never knew when someone in the family might need this place." Nathan picked up one of the papers. It was a letter written in his grandfather's shaky handwriting, dated just 2 years ago. "To my grandchildren, in case you ever need this refuge. This land has always been our family's and always will be. Never give up what is rightfully ours. The answers you seek are here." "Mrs. Dorothy, did my grandfather leave any kind of guidance about something important?" The lady was thoughtful for a moment. "Stanley had some problems many years ago. People trying to take his property, saying he owed money. But I always knew they were lies. Your grandfather was too honest." As they talked, Ethan began to cry. Dorothy extended her arms affectionately. "May I hold him? I raised 4 children. I have experience with babies." Nathan handed his nephew over to the lady's care, who immediately managed to calm the child with her maternal experience. "This little one is hungry. Do you have milk for him?" "I only have 1 can that's almost empty," confessed Nathan, embarrassed. "Don't worry, dear. I'll get more supplies. A child shouldn't go without." Dorothy went up with Ethan in her arms, and Nathan stayed to explore the shelter better. On a higher shelf, he found a metal box closed with a small padlock. Rust had practically destroyed the mechanism, which opened easily. Inside were old documents, photographs, and more letters. One of them caught his attention. It was an official document from a company called Johnson Construction, dated 1985, acknowledging a debt to Stanley Miller for an amount corresponding to a considerable sum by today's values. Nathan came up from the shelter, intrigued. Dorothy had returned with more supplies and was preparing a bottle for Ethan in the cabin's small kitchen. "Mrs. Dorothy, have you ever heard of a Johnson Construction?" The lady's face immediately closed off. "Where did you hear that name?" "I found a document here. It seems they owed money to my grandfather." Dorothy paused what she was doing and sat down heavily in a chair. "Nathan, that's a very complicated story. Johnson Construction caused a lot of trouble for your grandfather. The owner was Richard Johnson, a very powerful man in the region at that time." "What kind of problems?" "Richard hired your grandfather to do a big job, but when it was time to pay, he made up an excuse saying that Stanley had stolen materials from the construction site. Your grandfather could never prove his innocence and ended up with a tarnished reputation in town." Nathan felt a mix of anger and sadness. His grandfather had suffered an injustice and he never knew about it. "And what happened after that?" "Stanley moved here, to this cabin he had inherited from his parents. He never returned to the city. He made a living from small-scale farming and some carpentry work he did right here. But this document proves that the construction company owed him money." "Maybe, dear. But Richard Johnson passed away about 10 years ago. His daughter Jennifer still lives in town. She inherited all of her father's businesses." Nathan carefully stored the document. Perhaps it could help him in some way, although he wasn't quite sure how. In the following days, Dorothy became a constant presence at the cabin. She helped with Ethan, brought supplies, and told stories about the grandfather Nathan had never known. The simple routine brought a peace he hadn't felt in months. Ethan was developing well, gaining weight, and smiling more each day. It was on a Thursday morning that everything changed again. Nathan was in the small backyard behind the cabin, trying to plant some vegetables with the seeds Dorothy had brought, when he heard the sound of a car approaching. It was a luxurious vehicle, completely out of place in that rural setting. An elegant woman, about 40 years old, got out of the car. She wore an expensive suit and shoes that clearly weren't suitable for walking on dirt. "Good morning," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be the new resident of this property." "I'm Nathan Miller. How can I help you?" "What a coincidence. Miller, I'm Jennifer Johnson. I believe our families knew each other in the past." Nathan's heart raced. It was Richard Johnson's daughter. "Indeed, my grandfather and your father had business together." "Exactly. In fact, that's what I came to talk to you about," she said, taking a folder from the car. "I inherited some pending matters from my father, and this property is one of them." "What do you mean?" "Your grandfather had some debts with my father's construction company, debts that were never settled. I have the documents here." Jennifer opened the folder and showed several papers. Nathan tried to read them, but it was too much complicated legal information. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Well, considering that these debts have passed to you as the heir, and I imagine you're not in a position to settle them, I'm willing to make a deal. I'll buy the property for a fair price and we'll consider the debt settled." "How much would that be?" $15,000. Nathan almost choked. The property was worth much more than that, even if it needed repairs. "I need to think about it." Of course, but don't take too long. Legal matters tend to get complicated over time." After Jennifer left, Nathan felt confused and worried. He really didn't have the money to contest legal issues, and if those debts were real, he could lose the property anyway. When Dorothy arrived in the late afternoon, Nathan told her about the visit. The lady's expression became serious. "Nathan, there's something I need to tell you about this Johnson family. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now continuing. Richard Johnson was never an honest man. He used legal tricks to take properties from simple people who didn't have the resources to defend themselves. Your grandfather was one of his victims, but the documents she showed looked official. "Documents can be forged, dear. Stanley told me many times that he was the one who was wronged, not the other way around. How can I prove this? Perhaps the answers are in the shelter. Your grandfather was very careful with important papers." That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Nathan went down to the underground shelter again. This time he searched more attentively, scouring every corner, every shelf, every possible hiding spot. It was in a small compartment behind the stairs that he found another sealed envelope. Inside were letters written in Richard Johnson's own hand, admitting the debt to Stanley and promising payment. There were also receipts for materials that proved Stanley had, in fact, used his own money to buy items that should have been supplied by the construction company. It was proof that his grandfather not only owed nothing, but had credits to receive. Nathan came up from the shelter with his hands trembling with emotion. Finally, he had evidence that could clear his grandfather's name and perhaps even recover the money owed to him. The next day, he went to the nearest town's notary office to verify the authenticity of the documents. The notary, a gentleman over 60 years old, examined the papers carefully. "These documents are legitimate," he confirmed. "And look, I remember this case. I worked here as an assistant in the 80s. There was a lot of talk at the time about Richard Johnson and his questionable practices. Do you think I can use this to challenge his daughter's claims?" "Without a doubt. In fact, based on the date of these documents and considering monetary correction and interest, the Johnson family owes you a substantial amount." Nathan left the notary's office with a mix of hope and apprehension. He knew facing Jennifer Johnson wouldn't be easy, but now he had the necessary tools. When he got back to the cabin, he found Dorothy agitated, holding Ethan in her lap. "Nathan, thank God you're back. That woman was here again, and this time she brought 2 men in suits. They said you have until tomorrow to sign the papers, or they'll take the property by force." "By force? Can they do that?" "I don't know, dear. They talked about court orders and other things I didn't quite understand." Nathan felt anger growing inside him. He had already lost everything once due to ruthless creditors. He wouldn't lose the last refuge he had. "Mrs. Dorothy, I need you to take care of Ethan tomorrow. I'm going to resolve this situation once and for all." "Do you have a plan?" "Yes, I do. And this time the truth will come out." The next morning, Nathan went to the Johnson construction office in the city. It was an imposing building downtown, showing the prosperity the family had gained over the years. Much of that prosperity, Nathan thought, came at the expense of people like his grandfather. The receptionist tried to stop him from going up, but Nathan was firm. Tell Mrs. Jennifer that Nathan Miller is here and that he brought very interesting documents about the debt she mentioned. A few minutes later, he was led to Jennifer's luxurious office. She was sitting behind a huge desk with the same two men in suits who had gone to the cabin. "Mr. Miller, I hope you've made a sensible decision about our proposal." "I have," said Nathan, placing his briefcase on the desk. "I decided it's time to know the truth." He opened the briefcase and spread out the documents he had found in the shelter. Richard Johnson's letters, the receipts, the proof of payment. Jennifer's face paled as she examined the papers. "Where did you get this?" "My grandfather kept everything. All the proof that it was your father who cheated him, not the other way around." One of the men in suits stepped forward to examine the documents, but Jennifer stopped him with a gesture. "Let me see this properly," she said, picking up one of the letters written in her father's own hand. Nathan watched as she read. He saw the exact moment when reality became undeniable. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, an expression of shock on her face. My father really wrote this?" "Yes, he did. Admitting that he owed my grandfather and promising to pay, a promise he never kept." Jennifer remained silent for long minutes, rereading the documents. Finally, she dismissed the two men accompanying her. "Mr. Miller, I need to speak with you in private." After they were alone, Jennifer stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city below. "My whole life I believed my father was an honest man. He always told me there were people trying to take advantage of him, people who didn't pay their debts and then made up excuses. And now I see that maybe I was raised with a distorted version of reality." Nathan felt there was something genuine in her reaction. It wasn't just the embarrassment of being caught in a lie, but the pain of discovering that the father she idolized wasn't who she thought he was. "Mrs. Jennifer, my grandfather suffered greatly from what your father did. He lost his reputation, his friends, had to isolate himself. But I didn't come here to cause more suffering." "What do you want then?" "Justice, and the acknowledgement that my grandfather was an honest man." Jennifer returned to her chair and picked up a calculator. According to these documents and considering monetary correction, the current debt would be approximately $120,000. It was more money than Nathan could imagine, enough to pay off all his debts and still have some left to start over. "I can pay this amount," said Jennifer. "But I need to know, are you going to make this public, sue the company?" Nathan thought carefully before answering. "I have no interest in destroying what you've built. I just want what's fair and the assurance that no one else will be deceived." "What if I do more than just pay? What if I help you get back on your feet?" "What do you mean?" "I have some projects in mind that could use a skilled carpenter. Honest work, well paid." Nathan was surprised by the proposal. He didn't expect Jennifer to want to help him beyond paying the debt. "Why would you do that?" "Because I discovered today that I've carried the guilt for crimes I didn't commit my whole life. Maybe it's time to try to correct the mistakes of the past." They spent the rest of the morning working out the details. Jennifer committed to paying the corrected debt and offering regular work to Nathan. In return, he agreed not to make the case public, allowing her to fix the company's problems without scandal. When Nathan returned to the cabin, he found a scene that moved him deeply. Dorothy was in the yard with Ethan in her lap, singing a lullaby while the baby smiled and tried to reach her white hair. "How did it go in the city?" she asked, noticing Nathan's relieved expression. "Better than I expected. I managed to resolve everything." "And the woman?" "She's going to pay what she owed my grandfather. More than enough to start our life over." Dorothy smiled, but there was something melancholy in her expression. "I'm happy for you, dear. Stanley would be proud." "Mrs. Dorothy, is something wrong?" "It's just... I was thinking, now that you have the means to leave here, you'll probably want to go back to the city, won't you?" Nathan realized he hadn't thought of that. During the last few weeks, the cabin had become more than a temporary refuge. It had become a home, and Dorothy had become much more than a helpful neighbor. "Would you like me to stay?" "Oh dear, you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can't stay stuck here in these woods because of an old lady." "What if I wanted to stay? What if I decided this is the place where Ethan and I should grow?" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. That would be the most wonderful thing in the world. That afternoon, the three of them went down to the underground shelter together. Nathan wanted to show Dorothy all the documents he had found and explain how everything had been resolved. "You know, Mrs. Dorothy, my grandfather wrote in a letter that the answers I was looking for were here. I thought he meant just the documents, and he didn't. That too, but I think he meant something bigger. This place gave me peace. It gave me a family," he said, looking at her and Ethan. "It gave me a purpose." "What kind of purpose?" "I want to turn this shelter into what my grandfather always wanted it to be, a place of refuge for people in need." Dorothy was intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I thought about creating a welcoming space here, for single mothers, struggling families, people who need time to get back on their feet. The underground shelter could be expanded, the cabin renovated." "That would be wonderful, dear, but that requires resources." "I have the resources now," and Jennifer offered to help as a way to make up for the damage her father caused. They spent hours planning how the project could work. Dorothy, who had been a nurse before retiring, was excited about the possibility of caring for people again. "I could help with basic medical care," she said, "and I have many friends in the community who would love to participate." Nathan felt he had finally found his place in the world. It wasn't just about running away from problems or hiding. It was about creating something positive, something that honored his grandfather's memory while helping others. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the following weeks, the cabin was transformed. Jennifer kept her word and not only paid the debt, but also provided materials for the renovations. Nathan discovered that she truly wanted to correct past mistakes and proved to be a reliable partner in the project. The underground shelter was expanded and modernized, keeping its rustic charm but gaining more comfort and functionality. The main cabin was renovated to accommodate more people, and a small infirmary was built under Dorothy's supervision. During the construction, other residents of the area started showing up to help. The news that Stanley's old property was being restored spread, and many people came to share memories of the man who had quietly helped so many families over the years. That's how Nathan learned that his grandfather had been a kind of guardian angel in the community. Whenever a family was going through hard times, Stanley would appear with groceries, medicine, or financial help. He never asked for anything in return, never talked about it. He simply helped and disappeared. "Your grandfather saved my family when I was a child," shared an elderly man who came to help with the construction. "My father had lost his job and we had nothing to eat. Stanley showed up with a cart full of food and said it was surplus from his harvest. Only years later did we find out he had bought everything with his own money." Stories like this multiplied. Nathan understood that his grandfather had turned that property into a base for his charitable actions. The underground shelter wasn't just for emergencies, but also a place where he stored supplies to distribute to those in need. 2 months after the work began, the project was almost ready. Nathan had named the place Stanley's Shelter in honor of his grandfather. Dorothy had moved into a small house built on the property to always be available to help future guests. Ethan was growing fast and becoming a happy, healthy child. Dorothy had become his adoptive grandmother, and he clearly adored her. The routine of the three had settled naturally and harmoniously. It was on a rainy autumn afternoon that they received the first person who needed help. Nathan was fixing a plumbing issue at the shelter when he heard Dorothy shout from upstairs, "Nathan, come quickly! There's a young woman here who needs help." He rushed upstairs and found Dorothy supporting a young woman of about 20, soaked by the rain and visibly pregnant. The girl was in labor. "Please," she said with difficulty, "I need help. I have nowhere to go." "Of course, dear," Dorothy said immediately. "Let's get you inside. Nathan, get the clean towels and boil water." The young woman's name was Ashley, and she had fled from a complicated family situation. She was 9 months pregnant and had knocked on the door of the first house she saw with a light on. "My family wants to force me to give up the baby for adoption," she explained between contractions. "They say I'm too young to be a mother, that it will ruin my life. And what do you want? Dorothy asked gently as she examined her. "I want to keep my child. I know it will be difficult, but he's my son." Dorothy exchanged a meaningful look with Nathan. This was exactly the kind of situation they had created the shelter for. The birth happened a few hours later, with Dorothy leading the entire process with her years of nursing experience. Nathan helped as best he could, taking care of Ethan and providing everything that was needed. When the baby was born, a healthy, strong boy, Ashley cried with emotion. It was the first time Nathan had witnessed a birth, and he was deeply moved by the experience. "What will you name him?" Dorothy asked, holding the newborn. "Noah," Ashley said without hesitation, "like the angel who protects children." In the days that followed, Ashley recovered quickly. She was a determined and intelligent young woman who had studied accounting before her pregnancy changed her plans. Nathan saw in her a strength that reminded him of himself when he had to take responsibility for Ethan. "Ashley, do you have anywhere to go when you're recovered?" he asked one morning as she helped Dorothy care for the two babies. "Not really. Maybe I can rent a small room in the city, but I don't know how I'll work and take care of Noah at the same time." "What if you stayed here for a while? You could help us with the shelter's administration in exchange for room and board." Ashley's eyes lit up. "You would do that for me?" "You don't understand," Dorothy said with a smile. "We wouldn't be doing you a favor. You'd be doing us one. We need someone with your background to help organize things." And so, the small family of 3 became a family of 5. Ashley brought a youthful energy and a practical perspective that perfectly complemented Dorothy's experience and Nathan's determination. Stanley's shelter officially opened its doors a few weeks later. The news spread through the region via community support networks, and they soon began receiving people who needed temporary help. They came as single mothers who had left abusive relationships, families who had lost their homes, and young people who needed support to get back on their feet. Each case was unique, but all found in the shelter not just physical shelter, but also emotional and practical support to rebuild their lives. Jennifer became a regular benefactor of the project, not only providing financial resources, but also helping connect the shelter with social services and employment opportunities in the region. She had found in repairing her father's mistakes a way to give meaning to her own life. Nathan discovered he had a talent for therapeutic carpentry. Teaching the shelter's residents to work with wood became a way to help them regain self-esteem and develop practical skills. Some of his students ended up getting jobs in the area. Dorothy found complete fulfillment as the shelter's nurse and counselor. Her life experience and maternal nature made her a beloved figure to everyone who passed through the place. She had found renewed purpose for her golden years. Ashley proved to be a natural administrator. She organized resident tracking systems, established partnerships with local organizations, and created a sustainability program that made the shelter increasingly self-sufficient. 6 months after opening, Stanley's shelter had already helped more than 30 people get back on their feet. Some stayed just a few days, others remained for months, but everyone left with more strength and hope than when they arrived. It was on a spring morning that an unexpected situation tested everything they had built. Ashley was in the makeshift office in the cabin when she heard cars approaching. Through the window, she saw 3 expensive vehicles parking on the property. From the first car emerged a well-dressed middle-aged man and woman. From the second, 2 men in suits who were clearly lawyers. From the third came an older woman, elegant and with a determined expression on her face. Ashley called Nathan and Dorothy, who came quickly to see what was happening. The man from the first car stepped forward and spoke loudly. "We're looking for Ashley Taylor. We are her parents." Ashley's heart raced. They had found her. "Ashley," her mother said, approaching, "enough of this nonsense. You're coming home right now." "I'm not going back," Ashley replied, holding Noah against her chest. "I'm already of legal age and can make my own decisions." "You're our daughter, and you're making the biggest mistake of your life," said her father. "A child can't raise a child." One of the lawyers stepped forward with a folder of documents. "Miss Taylor, we have here a court order questioning your ability to properly care for the child. Considering your current situation, without financial resources or permanent housing—" "She has permanent housing," Nathan interrupted, "and she's under our protection." "And who are you?" asked the older woman, who hadn't yet identified herself. "I'm Nathan Miller, owner of this property. This is Dorothy Anderson, our nurse, and this place is an official shelter for people in vulnerable situations." "Shelter?" laughed Ashley's father. "This is a cabin lost in the middle of the woods." "It's a home," Dorothy said firmly, "and Ashley is welcome here for as long as she needs." The older woman approached and spoke directly to Ashley. "My dear, I'm Dr. Margaret, a retired judge and child welfare counselor. Your parents have filed a petition to question your ability to raise your son." "Is that legal?" Ashley asked, frightened. "Technically, yes. But I came here personally because I wanted to see with my own eyes the situation you're in before making any decision." Dr. Margaret looked around the property, observing the renovated facilities, the well-kept garden, the general organization of the place. Then she addressed Dorothy. "Are you a registered nurse?" "Yes, I am. I worked for 40 years at the regional hospital before retiring." "And you, young man," she said to Nathan, "how do you support this shelter?" "I have partnerships with local companies providing carpentry services. Besides that, we rely on regular donations from benefactors committed to the project." "And how many people have stayed here so far?" 32 up to now," Ashley replied promptly. "I have all records organized, including follow-up after they leave." Dr. Margaret seemed impressed with the quick and precise answer. "May I see these records?" Ashley led the group to the office and showed the detailed files she had created. Each person who had been through the shelter had a record with their initial situation, length of stay, activities undertaken, and follow-up care. "Impressive," the judge murmured, flipping through the documents. "This level of organization rivals much larger institutions." Ashley's parents looked increasingly embarrassed as Dr. Margaret asked more questions and received detailed professional answers. "And what about the baby?" she finally asked. "How is he being cared for?" Dorothy stepped forward. "Noah is developing perfectly. I've monitored him completely since birth. Ashley is a dedicated and responsible mother. Can you show me the facilities?" The group took a full tour of the property, the renovated underground shelter, the well-equipped infirmary, the clean and organized bedrooms, the activity area. Everything was impeccable. When they finished the tour, Dr. Margaret asked to speak with Ashley privately. They sat on a bench under a tree, with Noah sleeping in his mother's arms. "Ashley, your parents are worried about you. They believe you aren't mature enough to raise a child." "Dr. Margaret, I know I'm young, but I love my son, and I'm doing everything I can to take the best care of him." "I see that, but they also argue that you don't have your own financial resources." "It's true I don't have much money, but I have a home, I have support, I have people who care about me and Noah. Doesn't that count for something?" The judge observed the young woman for a long moment. "It counts a lot, dear. It counts much more than money." They returned to the group. Dr. Margaret addressed Ashley's parents. "After evaluating the situation, I see no reason to question Ashley's ability to care for her son. She is in a stable environment, with adequate support, and shows total commitment to the child's well-being." "But, doctor," her mother protested, "she's too young." "Age doesn't determine maternal capability," the judge replied firmly. "I know older women who are terrible mothers, and young women like Ashley who are exemplary mothers." Ashley's father turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous. We won't allow our daughter to throw her life away because of a youthful mistake." "With all due respect," said Dr. Margaret, her voice taking on a sterner tone, "Noah is not a mistake. He is a human being who deserves to be loved and cared for. And your daughter is doing exactly that." Nathan felt compelled to speak. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, I understand your concern, but Ashley has found a family here that supports her. She is not alone." "Family?" the mother laughed bitterly. "You hardly know each other." "Family isn't about blood," Dorothy said softly. "It's about love, care, and mutual commitment, and that's exactly what we have here." Dr. Margaret stood up. "My decision is made. Ashley retains custody of her son. If you wish to contest it, You'll have to do so through the proper legal channels, but I warn you that you won't find grounds for such a challenge." She turned to Ashley once more. "Dear, you're doing admirable work here. I'll include this shelter on my list of recommended organizations for families in need of support." After the group left, there was a moment of silence. Ashley was trembling, still processing everything that had happened. "It's over," Nathan said gently. "You're safe." "I can't believe my own parents." Ashley began to cry. Dorothy embraced her tenderly. "Dear, sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who suffocate us the most. Your parents are afraid, and fear makes people act strangely. They'll never forgive me for choosing to stay here." "Maybe not now," said Nathan. "But one day, when they see how happy and healthy Noah has grown, they'll understand you made the right decision." The incident with Ashley's parents had an unexpected effect on the shelter. Dr. Margaret's visit brought official credibility to the project, and soon they began receiving referrals from other social organizations in the region. More importantly, the event strengthened the bonds among the shelter's residents. Nathan, Dorothy, and Ashley had faced an adverse situation together and emerged victorious. This solidified the feeling that they truly formed a family. Ethan and Noah were growing up like brothers, playing together and sharing toys. Nathan loved watching the two children interact, especially when Ethan, a few months older, tried to protect Noah from imaginary dangers. The work at the shelter intensified. They welcomed a family who had lost their home in a fire, a pregnant teenager who had been rejected by her parents, an elderly man who needed temporary care after surgery. Each case brought its own challenges, but also its own rewards. Nathan discovered he had a natural talent for listening to people and helping them find solutions to their problems. It wasn't professional counseling, but rather the kind of honest, empathetic conversation that was often all someone needed to regain the courage to move forward. Dorothy became the adoptive grandmother of all the children who passed through the shelter. She had stories for every situation, lullabies that calmed the most restless, and a lap that seemed to have infinite space for anyone needing affection. Ashley developed a financial education program for the guests, teaching them how to manage limited resources and plan for a more stable future. Her own experience of having to fend for herself uniquely qualified her for this task. 1 year after the shelter opened, they decided to throw a party to celebrate. They invited all the people who had stayed there and managed to rebuild their lives. They also invited the community volunteers who regularly helped and the benefactors who supported the project. Jennifer arrived early to help with the preparations. Over the months, she had become not only a partner in the project, but also a close friend. Her personal transformation had been remarkable. The cold, calculating woman who had appeared the first time had given way to someone warmer and genuinely interested in others' well-being. "Nathan," she said, while helping decorate the space, "have you ever thought about expanding the project? Opening other shelters in the region?" "I have, but I don't know if we have the capacity for that yet." "What if I told you I've secured interested investors, people who have seen the success of this shelter and want to replicate the model in other cities?" Nathan was intrigued. "What kind of investors?" "Local business people, mainly. People who grew up in the region and want to give something back to the community. They don't want control of the project, they just want to fund the expansion." "That would be a big responsibility." "It would, but it would also be an opportunity to help many more people." Nathan promised to think about the proposal. The party was starting, and he wanted to focus on the present before planning the future. The celebration was moving. People who had arrived at the shelter desperate and broken had left full of hope and returned to share their success stories. Former guests who had found jobs, secured permanent housing, rebuilt family relationships. "When I arrived here," one of the guests said during the speeches, "I had nothing but the clothes on my back and my 2-year-old daughter. You didn't just give us a roof over our heads, you gave us back our dignity. Today I have my own apartment and work as a nursing assistant. None of this would have been possible without the support I received here." Story after story followed. Nathan was deeply moved as he realized the real impact the shelter was having on people's lives. It wasn't just temporary shelter, but rather a turning point that allowed people to rebuild their lives sustainably. During the party, Ethan and Noah ran among the adults, playing with other children present. At one point, Nathan watched them playing with wooden blocks he had made himself. Ethan was teaching Noah how to stack the blocks with the patience of an older brother. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" said Dorothy, approaching him. "They really are. And to think that a year ago I didn't know how I was going to support Ethan alone. And look how far you've come. You've built a beautiful family and a project that's changing lives. Don't you regret joining us? Someone your age should be resting, not working so hard." Dorothy laughed. "Dear, these have been the best years of my life. After my husband passed and my children moved to other cities, I thought my useful days were over. You gave me back my purpose." "I think it was the other way around. You gave us purpose." "Maybe we did it for each other." At the end of the party, as the last guests were leaving, Nathan stepped onto the small makeshift stage to give a final speech. "I want to thank everyone who came today to celebrate with us. When I arrived at this property just over a year ago, I was running from my problems, trying to find a place to hide from the world." He paused, looking at the gathered people. "But I discovered you can't build a life by hiding. Life is built by opening up to others, by helping and being helped. My grandfather Stanley understood this decades ago, and I hope I'm honoring his memory with what we're doing here." The applause was warm and prolonged. Nathan stepped down from the stage and was hugged by Dorothy and Ashley. "That was beautiful," said Ashley with tears in her eyes. "It came from the heart." In the weeks following the party, Nathan thought a lot about Jennifer's proposal to expand the project. He had long conversations with Dorothy and Ashley, weighing the pros and cons. "My concern," said Dorothy, "is that expanding too quickly might make us lose what's special here. This family atmosphere, this personalized care." "I agree," said Ashley, "but I also see how many people still need help that we can't accommodate due to lack of space." "What if we expanded gradually?" suggested Nathan. "Maybe start with just one more shelter in a nearby town and see how it works." They decided to accept the proposal, but with clear conditions. Any new shelter would have to follow exactly the same operating model, with small, dedicated teams and close supervision from the original team. The second shelter opened in the neighboring town 6 months later. Nathan, Dorothy, and Ashley spent weeks training the new team, sharing not just the practical aspects of the work, but also the philosophy behind it. "Remember," Dorothy told the new volunteers, "you're not just offering shelter. You're offering hope. And hope is the most precious thing we can give anyone." The success of the second shelter led to requests to open others. Within 2 years, there were 5 Stanley's shelters operating in the region, each adapted to the specific needs of its community, but all following the same fundamental principles. Nathan became the general coordinator of the shelter network, traveling regularly to visit each unit and ensure quality standards were maintained. It was challenging work, but extremely rewarding. Dorothy remained based at the original shelter, but also traveled as a consultant and trainer for new teams. At 75 years old, she had more energy and enthusiasm than many people decades younger. Ashley specialized in social organization administration and became the financial director of the shelter network. She developed management systems that allowed monitoring the efficiency and impact of each unit in real time. Ethan and Noah grew up as brothers in every sense. At 4 and 3 years old, respectively, they already demonstrated natural empathy and often helped adults care for new guests arriving at the shelter. "Daddy," Ethan said one day, using the word he had started using to refer to Nathan. "Why are people sad when they get here?" "Because they've been through difficult times," Nathan explained. "But have you noticed they get happier after a while?" "Yes, and I like playing with them to make them laugh." It was exactly this naturalness of children in accepting and welcoming different people that made the shelter environment even more special. Guests often commented how the children's presence helped them maintain hope and perspective. One day, 3 years after the first shelter opened, Nathan received an unexpected call. It was from a journalist at a national magazine who wanted to do a story about the project. "Mr. Miller," said the journalist, "we've been following the work of Stanley's shelters through social media and some local newspaper articles. We'd like to do a broader piece about the social impact you're creating." Nathan hesitated. He valued the guests' privacy and didn't want the shelter to become an attraction or lose its intimate character. "Our main concern is protecting the identity of the people we help," he said. "I completely understand. We can focus the story on the methodology and results without exposing anyone. The goal is to inspire other communities to develop similar projects." After speaking with Dorothy and Ashley, Nathan decided to accept. The article was published 2 months later and had an impact none of them expected. The magazine hit newsstands on a Thursday morning. By Friday, the shelter phone wouldn't stop ringing. People from across the country wanted information about how to replicate the project in their regions. "Nathan," Jennifer said during one of her regular visits, "do you realize you've become a national reference in social outreach? Is that good or bad?" "It could be both. Good because you can help many more people. Bad if the pressure becomes too great and you lose control over the quality of work." This concern proved valid. In the following weeks, people started appearing wanting to visit the shelter, offer partnerships, propose changes to the methodology. It was important, but it was also overwhelming. Nathan realized he needed to create a structure to handle all this attention without it harming the shelter's daily work. With Ashley's help, he developed a plan for controlled visits and a social franchise system for people who wanted to open similar shelters in other regions. "The important thing," Dorothy said during a planning meeting, "is to always remember why we started this. It wasn't to become famous or build an empire. It was to help people in need." "You're right," Nathan agreed. "We need to grow responsibly, without losing our essence." They established that they wouldn't open more than 2 new shelters per year, and that each new coordinator would have to spend at least 3 months training at the original shelter before taking over their unit. The system worked well. In 5 years, there were 15 Stanley's shelters operating in different states, all maintaining the same quality standards and the same philosophy of humane care. Nathan, now 43 years old, had become a completely different person from the one who arrived at the cabin fleeing creditors. He had found not only financial stability, but also life purpose and a family he had chosen out of love, not obligation. Dorothy, at 80 years old, remained active and essential to the shelter's operation. Her wisdom and experience were sought by coordinators from all units, and she loved sharing knowledge with the younger generations. Ashley had graduated in administration through a distance learning course and was about to begin a postgraduate degree in third sector organization management. At 26, she was considered a social care specialist and received invitations to speak at universities. Ethan and Noah, now 9 and 8 years old, studied at the local school and were happy, well-adjusted children. They had friends in the community, but also maintained a special connection with the people who passed through the shelter. Often Nathan would find them seriously talking to guests, offering drawings they had made or simply listening to their stories. It was on a winter morning that Nathan went down to the underground shelter to organize some old documents. It had been a long time since he had visited that space calmly, just to remember how everything had begun. He sat in the same chair where he had found his grandfather's documents years ago. The shelter was now modern and comfortable, but still maintained its original rustic charm. On the walls were photographs of all the people who had passed through the shelter and given permission to be remembered that way. Hundreds of smiling faces looked at him from the photographs. Each one represented a story of overcoming, a life that had been touched and transformed by the work they did there. "Thank you, Grandpa," Nathan murmured, looking at a framed photo of Stanley that hung in a place of honor. "Thank you for leaving the clues that brought me here." He picked up one of his grandfather's original letters and reread it. One phrase in particular touched him more deeply than before. "The answers you seek are here." Now he completely understood what his grandfather meant. It wasn't just the documents that would prove his innocence or the money that was hidden. The real answers were about family, purpose, community, about discovering that happiness doesn't come from having much, but from giving much. Nathan came up from the shelter and went to look for Dorothy and Ashley. He found both in the kitchen, preparing lunch while talking about plans for the next month. "Girls," he said, using the affectionate term he had adopted to refer to them. "I want to talk to you about something." "Of course," said Dorothy, drying her hands on her apron. "What is it?" I want you to know that these have been the best years of my life, not just because of the project's success, but because of the family we've built together. Ashley smiled. Ours too, Nathan. You saved my life and Noah's. No, he said, shaking his head. You saved mine. When I arrived here, I was lost, without purpose, without hope. You helped me find a reason to live. Dorothy approached and hugged him. Darling, we all save each other. That's the beauty of a real family. That afternoon, the three of them sat in the backyard watching Ethan and Noah play with some guest children who were staying at the shelter temporarily. It was a scene of peace and contentment that summed up everything they had built together. Nathan, said Ashley after a while, have you thought about what it will be like when Ethan and Noah grow up? Whether they'll want to stay involved with the project? I have, but I think they should have the freedom to choose their own path. I agree, said Dorothy, but I have a feeling they're already on the right path. I see how they treat people, how they care about those who are sad or in need of help. That's true. Yesterday, Noah asked me if he could be a people caretaker like us when he grows up. And what did you say? I told him he could be whatever he wants, but we'd be proud if he chose to help others. The sun was setting between the trees, creating a golden and welcoming atmosphere. Nathan looked at the cabin where it all began, at the underground shelter that had become the heart of the project, at the buildings that had been added over the years. You know what amazes me the most? He said. It's how all this grew so naturally. We never had a grand plan. We simply responded to the needs that arose. Maybe that's the best way, said Dorothy. Very rigid plans sometimes keep us from seeing opportunities that come along. And look how many opportunities have come, added Ashley. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be managing a network of social shelters, I wouldn't have believed it. If someone had told me that at 80 I'd be working more and feeling more useful than at 50, I wouldn't have believed it either, Dorothy laughed. They stayed silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. The sound of children playing and birds preparing for the night created a perfect soundtrack for that moment of gratitude. You know what I think is our project's greatest success? Asked Nathan. What? The two asked in unison. It's not the number of people we've helped or the recognition we've received. It's the fact that we managed to create a place where people feel at home, where they can be vulnerable without fear, where they can start over as many times as they need. And where families are formed, added Ashley, looking at Ethan and Noah. And where love stories are written every day, said Dorothy, thinking of all the couples who had met at the shelter, all the friendships that had formed, all the bonds that had been created. When it got dark, they went into the cabin. The nightly routine was always the same. Family dinner, some time for the children to play, bath time, bedtime stories. It was a simple routine, but full of love and security. And, after Ethan and Noah fell asleep, the three adults gathered in the living room to talk about the plans for the following week. It was like this every night, a moment to align expectations, share concerns, and celebrate small victories. 3 new people arrive tomorrow, said Ashley, checking her schedule. A single mother with 2 young children, an elderly man who needs temporary care after being discharged from the hospital, and a young woman who left an abusive relationship. I'll prepare the rooms, said Dorothy, and make that soup the children love. I'll finish the table I was making for the children's room, said Nathan, and prepare some activities to keep them distracted during the first few days. That's how it worked. Every arrival was carefully planned so that the person would feel expected and welcome from the very first moment. Every departure was accompanied by a continuous support plan to ensure the transition was smooth. Oh, and I got an interesting call today, said Ashley. It was from a university in New York. They want to develop research on social welcoming methodologies and would like to use our project as a case study. Is that good? Asked Nathan. I think so. It could help formalize and systematize what we do, making it easier to replicate elsewhere. As long as they don't try to complicate what's simple, said Dorothy wisely. Sometimes academics want to turn things that are just love and common sense into rocket science. They laughed at Dorothy's remark, but knew she was right. The project's success lay in its simplicity and the authenticity of the relationships built there. Speaking of simplicity, said Nathan, have you noticed the question we get asked the most is, What's the secret to the shelter's success? And what's the answer? Asked Ashley. There's no secret, replied Dorothy and Nathan at the same time, then laughed at the coincidence. It's true, continued Dorothy. What we do isn't complicated. We offer what every person needs: shelter, food, affection, and the feeling that someone cares about them. And time, added Nathan. We give people time to reorganize without pressure. And hope, said Ashley. We show that it's possible to start over no matter what happened before. They talked late into that night, as they often did. These moments of reflection and planning were essential to maintaining the quality of the work and the team's unity. When they finally went to sleep, Nathan stopped by the children's room to take one last look at Ethan and Noah. They were sleeping soundly, with the peace of those who feel completely safe and loved. Thank you, murmured Nathan, not quite sure to whom he was directing his gratitude. To the grandfather who had left the clues, to Dorothy who had appeared at the right time, to Ashley who had brought new energy to their lives, to all the people who had passed through the shelter and contributed to its growth. Perhaps it was for all of them, or perhaps it was simply a general thank you to life, which had taught him that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. Nathan went to his room and, before sleeping, looked out the window toward the underground shelter. He no longer heard the mysterious sounds that had frightened him on the first night. Now he knew it was just the wind passing through the ventilation pipes. But sometimes, when the wind blew in a particular way, he liked to imagine it was his grandfather whispering words of approval and encouragement. It was a silly fantasy, he knew, but it comforted him on nights when he felt the weight of responsibility for so many lives. The next morning, another day began at Stanley's shelter. The routines repeated: family breakfast, preparations to welcome new guests, care for those already there, planning the day's activities. It was a simple life, but deeply meaningful. Nathan had discovered that true wealth wasn't in the money he had lost when his woodworking shop went bankrupt, but in the relationships he had built and the lives he had touched. End of story. And now, dear listener, tell us, what did you think of this story? Do you believe Nathan made the right decision in turning the shelter into a welcoming place? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to start life over? Share your opinion with us in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot to continue creating stories that inspire and move.